There we go. All right. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. So, somehow it is already September and many garden seasons are coming to an end. And so we want to take a time to kind of review how everybody's growing season went, get some feedback, maybe share any updates that you might have, and then as well as share some information we've gathered over the years on kind of closing down your gardens for the season. I don't know, Donica, if you wanted to start with that or start with some feedback.
Maybe let's start by hearing from the gardens and see if folks have anything that they would like to share about their growing seasons.
Anybody out there?
This is Gabrielle. I'm in my car. I apologize, but I'm at the MSU Denver Garden in Denver, and I was growing milkweed, coneflower, and the beans, and I had a terrible time with squirrels eating the beans. The coneflower and the milkweed did great, but I basically lost the bean plants. I'm just wondering if other people have had that happen.
I had squirrels eat my potatoes, so. Yeah, that
Squirrels sure.
Oh, go ahead, Donica.
Yeah, I was just saying those squirrels sure are pesky and they're hard to keep out of gardens.
Yeah, I think it feels like it was a particularly squirrel heavy year, at least near me this year. I don't know about everybody else. We have a regular garden as well, and they ate a lot. You know, it's tough. Fences only work so much. Squirrels are very good climbers and good at finding holes. If anybody has any secret tips for scaring squirrels away, I'm always open.
So what we've done, because the squirrels ate a number of my husband's pepper plants, so he took some forks and he put forks around it, because it's in the garden that we have in our yard, and he puts forks around it, kind of like creating a little bit of a fence to try to keep them from, because they were chewing it from around the base of the stem, and so those forks kind of helped with keeping them out without hurting them.
Ooh, that's kind of a fun idea.
But for us at Snug Harbor, what happened, we've had some challenges. I mean, we have the number of the gardens that are throughout like our site already. So we want to make sure that we always have a lot of like native plants and things that are also helping with the pollinators as we're going around. And then we had some staffing changes. So some of the things kind of did not get taken care of as well as we wanted. But it is something that we've addressed, and we've had some org changes, and we're getting back on track.
This was certainly a year for many folks with staffing changes. I don't think you're alone in that one. Anybody else?
I'm curious how folks found the ozone damage throughout the course of the year for those people who had gardens growing. I know that we talked a little bit about that last time, but I'm curious to know if others had ozone damage.
This is Gabrielle again. In Denver, yes, we definitely had quite a bit of ozone damage. It was interesting because I live in Boulder and I work in Denver, and I had a few extra plants of the beans, and so I had planted them at home, and they showed ozone damage like pretty early in the season, like almost right away. And took a little longer for the Denver plants to exhibit it, but then they definitely, the coneflower and the milkweed show a lot of damage.
Good to know. Thank you.
I'll say I haven't been able to monitor a garden all summer. We still weren't in the office much. But I did just go see our gardens, and our cornflower showed quite a bit of injury on the leaves as well. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did it seem worse this year, Erica, than in past years?
it did to me, yeah. But it could just be seeing it all at once versus kind of seeing it gradually show up. But it seemed pretty bad.
Yeah, quite interesting. Okay, well, I guess I'm more than happy for people to continue to share throughout, but I also don't want to hold everybody up by waiting to share. So do we want to talk about winterizing gardens next, or were there other things, Erica, that we were going to cover?
I think we can talk about winterizing next, and then if we want to come back to kind of community input, we can do that.
Okay, that sounds good. So I will just use the same information that I provided everybody with last year. And so if you were here last year, this will be a refresher. And I am happy to update this if folks have other ideas or other tips, because I'm not necessarily a plant growth expert. So if people have lots of experience overwintering some of these gardens, I think that would be great to share. So let me share my screen real quick, and I can put this into presentation mode. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so this is not this year picture of NCAR's garden, but this is one of NCAR's container. It's the container garden that's on the cafeteria patio. You can see the damage on the beans from this angle. But let's see. So as far as thinking about your gardens, the milkweed and the cutleaf coneflower are annual plants, and they also grow rhizomally. So that means that they have underground stems. So you can collect seeds and store them, but keep in mind that these two plants require vernalization or a cold treatment in order to germinate. So they're used to having winters where their seeds freeze before they regrow. So you can cut the seed pods and store in paper bags. If they're dry, you can also store in plastic bags, but I recommend paper just so that they don't get moldy in case they aren't all the way dry. And then you can also directly sow seeds into the ground in the fall, and that will take care of the vernalization process for you. If you decide to store the seeds and plant in the spring, I'd recommend refrigerating the seeds and or freezing them for a successful germination for the following year. You can, in the fall after the plants have senesced, you can cut the stems back to the ground. You could also do this in the spring if you wanted to. You can make the garden look a little nicer, and there's no value in, the plants will regrow from the base the following year. So keeping those stems around doesn't do the plant any good. As far as the snap beans go, when the plants have died and the leaves turn brown and shriveled, you can pull them up by the roots or cut the stem to the ground. We don't recommend planting harvested pods unless you've only planted one type of pod, because these cultivars, the sensitive and the tolerant cultivars, do interbreed, and so the seeds that you have will have unknown sensitivity. Granted, the tolerant plants often do have or exhibit ozone damage as well. It's just at they're not nearly as sensitive as the sensitive beans. So, and I also included a note here that harvesting and weighing the pods is a fun end of the season activity. And you can track year-to-year variation. We don't have a place to enter this information on our online portal because we were just looking at visible damage. But it's a fun activity to do at your gardens or in your classrooms, whatever you're using. You can compare the sensitive and tolerant cultivars and the number of pods and the weight. Usually we we do the dried weight of pods. That's just so that you're not getting the water weight in there, so you can clip them and let them dry. You know, either air dry for a fair amount of time, or sometimes we'll put them in a low temperature oven to dry them. As far as potatoes go, you can let the plants dry. They will dry up and turn brown. If they're not doing that, you can just make sure to stop watering them, and they will in the fall. And then you can dig the tubers up by digging in the ground around the outside edges of the plant, and then just brush off the dirt. You don't want to scrub it off because you don't want to damage the skin of the potato. And then you can cut off the above ground vegetation. And then we recommend storing the potatoes in paper bags or a cardboard box at cool room temperature, 45 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit for about 2 weeks. That will help them to cure. And then you store them in a cool, dry place, like refrigerator temperatures, until they're ready for spring planting. So I say here that a fridge is ideal for winter storage, but you can also use a cool basement or a garage if you don't have fridge space. You just don't want the potatoes to freeze and then thaw again. Yeah, and so I guess I made a note that we don't, at NCAR, we can't always dig up potatoes without damaging the other plants. And so that's been challenging. And so we've, put a thick layer of mulch on top of them, and they have re-sprouted from year to year. So that's another option, but that is a bit of a gamble because there have been some years that they didn't re-sprout at all. So we just lost the crop. So another thing you might want to consider is mulching your garden. So after you harvest everything, if you are going to harvest anything, you can just put a layer of mulch on to keep the soil more insulated from severe winter weather. It can help with weeds, and it can help maintain soil moisture in the spring. And a lot of times what I found is the perennials sprout through the mulch. So I'm sorry, it's quite windy here. I hope that you're not hearing that too much. I found that the cut leaf coneflower typically start growing here in about April every year, and the milkweed grow a little bit later, closer to late May or early June. And the potatoes come up around the same time as the milkweed if they have successfully overwintered. And then we always plant our snap beans after the last frost, which here is over Memorial Day. So when you're, thinking about for next spring, the coneflower and the milkweed are perennials and they should regrow each year, but we can also get you new seeds if you need them. And if you need rhizomes, occasionally we can dig up rhizomes and mail them. They can grow pretty well from rhizomes, but that can be a little bit of a trickier thing to mail the actual rhizomes. But for the new gardens, if you wanted to plant some of the seeds outdoors this fall, you can do that. You can also try sprouting them in the greenhouse, but again, they have to be vernalized. Potatoes should be planted 2 to 3 weeks before the last frost, and the snap beans should be planted in the spring after the last frost. And then I include at the bottom of this, we can share this document with you, but these are helpful websites for spring growing. And I think that that's all that I had that I wanted to talk to you about. So yeah, I can, if anybody has questions or wants to add in.
I will say for folks starting, that maybe haven't gotten their gardens yet this year, but are hoping next spring to get going. As much as I also want to send rhizomes, in Massachusetts, we are one of the later growing starts to our season. And so by the time I have sprouted rhizomes that I can find in my garden, many of you are already too far into your seasons. So I'm always happy to send seeds and willing to try for rhizomes, but want to put that caveat next spring that my season starts after many others. I know some, Donica, and any, others on here that are better plant expert than I am. I have read that sometimes you can try in the fall to transplant a rhizome. which is a little easier because I think, I'm coming to the end on my season, and I think many folks have a little bit longer. I'm willing to try now if anybody needs coneflower or milkweed. I have some coneflower that I can actually find right now. I'm willing to send.
Awesome. Yeah, fall is a great time if folks were struggling with coneflower this year and need them, or the milkweed. It's a good time to send rhizomes. Yes, you can just let Erica know.
Yeah,
if you
anybody
need them.
needs them,
We can, yeah, we can send that information in the follow-up email as well if we remember, I guess.
John Bell here from the Arlington, Virginia Ozone Garden. I apologize. I've had to be in and out on this meeting, so if this was addressed, sorry. But we had quite a bit of trouble with our tobacco this year. We did have volunteer tobacco just start growing in the bed that we planted last year, and I assume, given what you said about the beans, and you don't want to be harvesting, you don't want to be planting. In case of cross-pollination, the beans that you've harvested, I assume the same goes for the tobacco as well. I wasn't sure if the seeds that we got from last year are just less viable this year, because we just had a ton of trouble with our starters and transplanting and that sort of thing. So I don't know if anybody else came across similar problems.
I know a lot of our sites don't grow tobacco. It is harder to grow from seedlings. It should still be viable. I have new tobacco. I'd be happy to send you some if you want to try it again from a fresh start. Early on, we had a volunteer to help us start the seedlings, and we were able to send seedlings rather than seeds. We had an expert who just grew them for us regularly. But it's not available anymore to us. So now we don't have many people that try the tobacco just because it's a little harder, and a lot of sites just don't want tobacco on site.
Visually, so when we do get it growing, or at least this is only our second grow year, and yesterday, or
Very sensitive.
last year, when we got it growing, I mean, they grew 15 feet high, and it was just very like visually stunning, and it drew a lot of people, and maybe a little bit of ire if that's what you're sort of suggesting, where people don't want to be growing tobacco. But it was we found it just to kind of be a great conversation starter or public engagement. But yeah, if you do have more seeds, we could use them. I think I exhausted almost all of our supply just trying to get starters going and transplanting them.
Yeah, John, if you could have someone email me afterwards, just so I don't lose track, I will happily send you some more seeds. Yeah, some people just don't, there's social connotations around tobacco, but other folks, it does have historical indications, and so some sites want to grow it. It can be incredibly sensitive. So if you're in some of our sites that have lower ozone levels, it can be really nice because you can see it, the ozone impact quite easily on the tobacco. But I will happily send you more seeds.
Great, thanks, Erica.
No problem.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe John, you might want rhizomes too, the coneflower and the milkweed. If so,
Our coneflower is cooking. We have no problems with our I think we have 3 sensitive coneflower. Is there not a tolerant strand?
We don't provide one, although there are plenty you can find commercially that tend to be tolerant because they've bred that out as much as they can.
Our coneflower came back this season in a great way, and my understanding am I correct in understanding that the more seasons you grow your coneflower, the more easily you'll be able to identify the ozone as well?
yeah, I think that's generally true, and that's even more so true for the milkweed. I think the coneflower, I I feel like I see more consistently the damage from year to year, whereas the milkweed, the first probably 3 years I didn't see a whole lot of damage, and now I see, now that it's been 5 or 6 years, I guess it's been longer than that, 7 years. I've seen lots of damage in the past few years on the milkweed, and so it takes a little while. But I would say that the same is true for the coneflower. The early, younger plants you don't always see as much of the damage as you do in the plants that have been around longer. Glad to hear that the coneflower is doing well, though. It's always nice.
Yeah, and we've been able to even take snippets for personal use in our home gardens.
At Snug Harbor, we'd like to request some seeds. As I said, trying to revamp again and just making sure, because as I said, so staff changes and stuff, so we're going to give it, another try as we go through now. And yeah, so we'll follow up with you with email requesting seeds, but letting you know in the meeting now that we'd like some.
Awesome. Excited to get that garden started. All right. Anybody else have any kind of questions or concerns around the gardens, or in general about, measuring ozone, you're doing your observations for ozone? Or anything that worked really well in helping support visitors make their own observations?
I have a kind of a question. So I wasn't able to collect data like over the season, but we did collect some data last week, which was great. And I just focused on the milkweed, and what I decided to do was document like along the height of the plant, if there were any trends in leaf damage from the base to the top. Just thinking at the base, leaves would be older and the top leaves would be younger. I haven't analyzed the data yet, but it's just an idea. And if it does work out, it would be something we could do with the, if you only can do a snapshot and want to look for something, I don't know. So thoughts on that?
Great idea. That's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like the snapshot that, Donica suggests with the beans. Like that's a fun, it's not quite as observational, but it is a great activity and really obvious. Like if you want to, at the end of your season, do a special day with your visitors where you harvest all the beans and compare them. I remember the first season I did it with my snap beans. I was shocked at how different the weight was, the size of all the beans. It's a really great activity to do with the public, but I like the idea of looking up and down the plant as well.
Yeah, and I will say that is I'm blanking, a Great Smokies National Park. They've actually follow the same leaves through time. Their names are just like evading me today, but the plant that they use, they actually mark the leaves and they follow the same leaves through time, and so they have like a leaf structure. That can be a lot harder to do on the coneflower, for example, than start with a rosette of leaves and then grow new leaves. And it's also just harder for community scientist visitors to track those through time. But if you're doing it in a more structured educational setting, I think that's a really nice way of doing it. And so I really like that idea, Gabrielle, of taking a snapshot in time and looking sort of the top leaves versus the bottom leaves, and seeing what you're seeing, how severe the damage is, and how it sort of plays out on the different types of leaf structures. So it'd be interesting if you have results from that, if you wanted to share at some point. I would love to see.
Yes, I will share it with you. I actually did it with a class, and so later this semester we're going to analyze the data as a class, so I'll send it to you for sure.
It'll be really fun. Yeah, and I know Jennifer, I believe you at your garden did some work looking at the beans and the bean weights, correct?
Yes, we didn't look at the weights. It was just so obvious. The length of the non-sensitive beans were 2 3/4 to 3 inches longer than the sensitive beans. In fact, the sensitive beans, I'm only down to like 3 plants. I mean, they have really dried up on their own, even though they're all getting the same amount of water. They're getting tended the same way. They're really dying, versus the non-sensitive beans are still producing flowers for pollination for more beans. It's just crazy, the difference. But the biggest thing that happened with us, and I know that Danica knows, Dr. Lombardozzi, we received the results, the back end results from the kiosk that we put into the children's department. Would this be a good time to share those?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. So we have a kiosk, and this little guy, which if I can see that little froggy there. Okay. He's kind of our mascot for the garden. And we have 5 questions that we ask the public in this little kiosk about ozone. And if they don't know the answer, this little frog jumps up and down, goes tip, 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 and he gives them some tips. So this was our first year, and it will be a complete year in October. At this point in time, we had 1,773 questions answered. We were floored. We thought we might be getting about 200. And out of those questions, 50% of the time people had the right answer, 50% they didn't. But what was the most interesting, that the number one question that we first asked them is, what is ozone? 56.74% of the people did not know. So that tells us we have a lot of opportunity for public education. But this is a wonderful project. It was put together with a grant from the Smithsonian Harvard project that you all are working on. And it just shows us how much more education we have to do here locally.
Yeah, that's really great. I really appreciate you sharing that report with us and kind of what your audience is seeing. And I think we can make some assumptions that many of our audiences are kind of at that same starting point of their understanding of what ozone is and how it impacts living things. So we really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you. And if anybody else wants a copy of the questions that we asked, it took a really long time to come up with 5 questions. Not only did we turn to you, the experts, but we also locally went to preschool through university professors with how the questions were being worded and what the options might be, so that we could gain interest from multiple generations into this kiosk, even though it's located at the children's department of the library.
Yeah, us here in Arlington would love a copy of those 5 questions. Definitely, we're actually doing a public presentation at our garden on Friday for the local master naturalist community, as well as a local retirement community. So yeah, that would be wonderful if you could pass that along. Should I just put my chat, or?
I'll put my email in for anybody that wants to have a copy. Just email me and we'll get you a copy of the questions. Okay.
Thank you.
Would that be something that we can send out in the follow-up email as well?
Sure.
Yeah, and actually that reminds me, I just want to remind the group that the Google group you're all on, everybody is capable of emailing the whole group. So if anybody ever has a question or wants to share something they've learned, it's a Google group that we can all send to, not just Donica and I. And it's just, oh, I always get it wrong. What is it? Ozone. Put in ozone-garden@cfa.harvard.edu. So anybody can send to that and it'll go to the whole group. So be thoughtful about it, but also if you have something that you think, other sites similar to you might learn from, or you have a question that you're like, I don't know, and someone on this group can probably answer, I think it's a really great opportunity to build our communication. So I will put that in the chat too, to remind everybody. Yeah, Gabrielle? You have your hand up.
Sorry, I was not trying to do that. I'm on my phone and I was
Okay.
trying to look at the chat.
I know Zoom is not ideal for a phone. So it's been there before. Well, if no one has any specific other things I want to share about the garden, I have kind of I'd like to gauge some interest. As we've mentioned in a couple of the meetings, Tempo, the air quality mission, that's why I get to be here, is launching next spring. And we're interested in putting together some resources for folks to maybe hold a launch party of some sort. Launch should be sometime in March. And I'd love some input from this group on if any of you would be interested in hosting something like that, and what kinds of resources or materials would you want to be able to do that. It'll kind of be wonderful timing because it'll be right before it was going to be February and now it's been moved to March. So it'll be ideally good timing for the start of a growing season as well. To kind of interest, and then anybody has any thoughts on what would make it, what kind of resources I can put together to make it useful at your sites. Yeah, Susanna?
I encourage Puyan to jump in as I'm saying this, but I think that we would love to be part of doing a launch. And I think in terms of resources, it would probably be great to have some materials in advance of an event that might even involve some video that can do compare and contrast so that people understand, because at that time of year, they won't necessarily be able to see plants further into their growing cycle. So it's always nice to kind of have that time elapsed reference point so people can start to see the deeper meaning. It might be nice to also have some video links for people to understand how this is happening across the country and links into efforts across the world. That some of that stuff for both advanced communications or to be able to access during the event would really be able to deepen context. I understand I just brought up some pretty resource intensive components, but those would be cool for people to be able to not feel alone as they're trying to understand what the meaning is of putting in these gardens and observing them.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Anybody else?
I believe we received like some bookmarks or something last time, some like hard copy handouts, especially if we're hosting a non-virtual launch party. It'd be great to have either some images of the telescope. We even, our team, half jokingly thought about maybe even trying to construct like a small model of what it would look like, because specifically like having one that could be outdoors and just like set up next to the garden, it has people sort of connecting this idea that there is a monitoring system up there, that the garden is hopefully going to supplement some of the data that we're receiving and this and that. So I don't know if you guys just have a model on hand you can send us, but we'd be interested.
We don't, but I'm working on a 3D print.
Yes.
Yes, working with our NASA counterparts to get a 3D print file that we can share with everybody, and potentially we could print some of them to share. Working on different sizes of it. They currently have, if anybody wants to get one printed, they have one that is, 3/4 size, so it's still quite large. We're working on one that's a little bit more feasible to move around. But that's great to know that that's something like that would be useful. So,
and just one more, that last I heard it was January, so now it's pushed to March.
It's been pushed to March. Yeah, there was the host satellite had some complications that they have worked through, but it is now pushed to like March 3rd, or some in that week timeframe.
And so this is way too soon to ask. I assume we don't really have a window because it could be at like 2 a.m. or something like that.
So it's either going to be 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. or something, like 6 to 7 a.m. or 6 to 7 p.m. There's like morning or evening are the two options. I'm hoping for that evening one. I think it's
A happy hour party would be great.
exactly. We're looking into potentially, hosting some live video stream, likely only if it's the evening one. I doubt we'll do it if it's 6 a.m. because I can't imagine we'll have a huge audience at that hour. But if it's the evening time frame, doing some live video streaming. So that would be a potential addition as well. Anything else that would make hosting some sort of launch party more beneficial? Dream big. I can't promise it, but at least then I can see what I can, what the interest is and work from there. Would folks want like a air quality expert to zoom in personally to you?
I love that.
Yes. I don't know what, I've been a little out of the loop. I don't know what the resolution is or of the sensor, but my students are really interested in issues of like equity and environmental justice, and in the metro area, they're interested to know about differential exposure to ozone. I don't know if that's something that could be addressed by a speaker, but we'd be interested.
Absolutely, it can be. There's a broad number of scientists that are going to be working with tempo data. And so there are a number that are interested in environmental justice and equity. So I would certainly reach out to the groups and see how many I could gather for folks. And in a separate grant, I am working on creating some resources for doing just that, for engaging your teens and kind of thinking about your air quality and how they might investigate that and then take that and do something with it in your community, whether that's creating some sort of communication plan with your community of like, here's our impact that's happening to us, or talking to local councils about concerns around, differential impact between one local community and another. So we're putting together some of those resources.
That sounds wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah, that'll be a good thing for us to keep in mind. Maybe we can start to tackle that next year in our summer series. We can have a meeting about that.
Yes, I've been meeting more and more folks interested in that. So we can certainly see if we can get 1 or 2 speakers to come talk to us about that. And this summer we had Erin Nager from the Early Adopters Group. They were holding a special session on environmental justice around air quality. I think I sent that link, but I can send it again. It's all recorded, so if you missed it, you can still watch it all.
Oh, I would love to see that. Yeah, I missed that. So thanks a lot.
All right. Unless anybody has anything else they'd like to share or communicate with us, we can give folks a little bit of their day back.
That sounds like a good plan to me. Thank you all for growing your gardens this year and for, keeping us posted about how things are going. If you have ideas for other things that you would be interested in hearing about, either throughout the winter or spring, or ideas for talks or people who you would like to hear from, or types of things you would like to hear about, next summer as we go through some of the Ozone Garden stuff, please don't hesitate to email Erica or I. We're always open to new ideas.
Yes, we would love that. It makes our life easier if I know what you want to hear. I can certainly find the people. So. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.